Greetings, I'm Seth Grimes. I'm a consultant and analyst around emotion technologies, emotion AI, and the technologies that contribute to that, natural language processing, voice technologies, facial coding, and all of that kind of stuff. I'm sitting with Pamela Pavliscak, who is a professor of design, consultant, and a bunch of other stuff. Pam, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself however you would wish to be introduced?
Well, yeah, it is. It's kind of a tangle, isn't it? I teach at Pratt Institute. I teach emotional design and speculative design there. I also run a small consultancy where we focus on emotion tech and emotional design. We're kind of shifting our branding, so that'll be a new reveal maybe for May. And then I also do a lot of speaking and writing in the field as well.
Well, we'll get to both of those things in a moment.
Okay.
But let's start with a quotation. You've written, and I'm reading here, "Now more than ever, we need technology that respects what it means to be human." Would you please explain that a little bit? Which technologies, how can technology be more human? How will that make a difference in our everyday lives, in our business lives?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because humans are beautifully complicated, and we typically tend to think of like tech as a separate thing, and we try as hard as we can to compartmentalize it and keep it separate. But the fact is, it mediates so much of our experience. And I think now, especially in this COVID-19 crisis, we're seeing that technology is sort of this tenuous thread keeping us all together. And it's not a neutral conduit. So for instance, we were just chatting earlier about how Zoom has this weird quality where you're seeing yourself the whole time you're having a conversation. You can turn that off, of course, but do you? I don't know. And we kind of adjust our emotional expressions. We adapt our behavior to that. And I think that's something we don't think about a lot in the technology world, is how much our technology actually is not neutral and how it changes our behavior, but also potentially our emotional life. And so when I mean I want technology to respect what it means to be human, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, I want a bunch of human-like bots, although I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or not, but I want it to be sensitive to emotion because that's a big part of who we are. And we can't really separate that out and say like, no, we're just going to be totally rational about everything and we don't have this emotional side. And so that's kind of my goal when I'm talking about humanizing technology in that way.
Sure. So we should have technology that's sensitive to emotion. We who use technology should think about how emotion conveys via the technology. Let's talk about your book. You wrote a book on emotionally intelligent design, and you teach at Pratt Institute. What differentiates emotionally intelligent design from, I don't know what you'd want to call it, insensitive design, generic design? And how do you go about emotionally intelligent design?
Yeah, well, to me, I think emotionally intelligent design borrows from the concept of emotional intelligence. So it recognizes and respects emotion. And it's funny because I think in design, a lot of times we think about designing technology that's like friction free or doesn't have any emotion. Or maybe if we think about it a little bit, we think like, oh yeah, we're going to have two ideal states. One's going to be calm or neutral, and one's going to be delight. And we don't really think beyond those two states that we could have. But to me, design is kind of this layer between people and the world. And that's what makes it important when we think about our emotional life. Design, look around you, everything is designed. And design affects affect. And so that's something that I develop in the book and want to share some insights in the talk. And something I've been working on too during this kind of downtime that we all have is a toolkit for designers and developers who want to be more attuned to emotion and design.
Yeah, you have a bunch of books in back of you. I bet you have a copy of your book.
I do. Not at all rehearsed. Here it is.
So, emotional intelligent design, and I'm sure people can find it fairly easily online. How else do they find you online?
Probably the best place that collects everything is Pamela.is.
Okay, very good. So how deeply does your work, it's design oriented, but how deeply does it get into particular emotion technologies, emotional artificial intelligence technologies, regarding emotion AI and affective technologies more generally? What's your assessment of them? How well do they work? How does your work relate to artificial intelligence, if at all, and how much do you expect it to in the future?
It does. I mean, that was a big motivation for writing the book and a big shift in my work, because as I was thinking about emotion and how it affects how it intersects with our relationship with technology, this new technology started coming along and becoming more and more developed. And so I started watching it maybe 4 or 5 years ago and really getting more knowledgeable about it, I hope, in the past few years. And I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because when we think about technology that could potentially detect and interpret and maybe emulate emotion, all kinds of red flags go up, because you think to yourself, like, well, will it know my deepest secrets? Will it reveal things to other people that I don't want it to reveal? Am I going to be rewarded or punished based on these emotions that it's detecting? I think the short-term answer to all of that is no. And I think the longer-term answer to all that is also probably no. But does this make emotion AI and affective computing useless? I don't think it does. I mean, I try to think of it as the technology is kind of in this toddler phase. So when you're a toddler, you see emotion in very broad strokes. So we all know, well, as a parent, I know this very intimately, but you know, a 2-year-old if they're angry, they make a face and they stomp their feet and they cry, or when they see a smile, they're like, yeah, that's happy. But even toddlers kind of start to have some sense of context, right? So a toddler might be like, well, okay, a smile from my mom is different than a smile from a stranger, for instance. Emotion AI doesn't really have that context yet, and it's still learning emotion. So even with like the best coding for micro expressions and training on tons of very diverse data, it still doesn't really know that much yet. And part of it is, you know, the model that it's using. It's based on kind of a more evolutionary psychology model that just starts with a few basic discrete emotions. And I think that's an easy starting place for it. I don't think it will stay there, because there is kind of a nature-nurture argument going on in the field right now. And the nurture part would say, well, emotions change and develop, and we get a little more knowledgeable about them over time as humans. And I think machines may do that too. But what's exciting about it is, and I will end my point here soon, is that AI does some stuff that we humans don't do very well. It pays attention very closely and consistently all the time. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. It detects patterns in things that we might not pick up. So quite recently, I came across an article that said, we've determined 5 or 6 mouse facial expressions. And I was like, oh, whoa, you know, this is really crazy. But then if you start to think of the implications of that, like, okay, if we can detect when an animal is in pain, that maybe will change our behavior. Maybe we'll become more compassionate. Maybe it will help us in the kind of research that we do. And so I think, you know, for me, the key with all of this stuff is treat it as like a little hint of something, a little glimmer of something. It's not the absolute truth, but it's a clue, I guess.
You've described the potential for the technology to do better, to improve. You also started off your last remarks talking about some of the potential misuses of the technology. Now, I do have you giving a talk in just a couple of weeks on May the 5th at the Emotion AI conference. For anyone who's looking, that's emotionai20.com online. Your talk at the conference is designed for an emotionally intelligent future. It's forward-looking, and that's you're well positioned as the closing keynote at the conference. In emotionally intelligent future, can you elaborate what are the benefits that we're going to see? You started talking about how effectively emotion AI actually might help us be better humans. What kind of benefits and what kind of expectations can we have for emotion AI technologies?
Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes, just when I'm fondly dreaming, I'm like, well, adorable robots, hug transmitting mugs, mood changing clothing. I'm waiting for all that stuff. But really, it's a big unknown, especially now when so much is changing. We don't know, like, what are the implications of this current global pandemic on our mental health? Will emotion AI support us? Or will it end up being surveillance? Will we be able to use it to embed our voice assistants with more empathy? And we need that because we might have a little less human interaction in certain contexts, like medical contexts. I think these are all like the potential to augment human capacity is enormous. And I think that's the key, is augmenting human capacity, not automating it. So I think, on the positive side, I'd like to explore futures that help us gain self-awareness and social awareness and cultural awareness and avoid those futures that I think we all want to avoid, that feel too invasive or manipulative. So hopefully we'll use this pause together to explore positive futures. And design is a great way to do that because it helps us to make that imagination a little more concrete. And that's what we'll be talking about in May.
Very good. Well, thank you. So until May the 5th, we'll wrap for now. Thank you very much, Pamela Pavliscak, for this conversation today, and see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Seth. Great to talk to you.